Hello, Chamber members. Welcome back to Chamber Conversations. Our unique approach to introducing you this year to our Frederick County delegation members. We're not able to have that great live event at the Delaplane Visual Arts Center, so we're substituting these individual conversations. And I have to tell you, we've recorded 5 of them, and I enjoy this so much more than just getting little minute or 2 snippets from our delegates and senators. Today, I'm thrilled to be able to host Delegate Ken Kerr, who represents the best legislative district in all of Maryland, Legislative District 3B. Delegate Kerr was sworn in on January of 2019. Before running for the House of Delegates, Dr. Kerr was an elected member of the Frederick County School Board, and much of his political career with a slight deviation in information technology, but most of his career has been spent in higher education, including several years as the chair of the English department at Frederick Community College. Ken serves on the House Health and Government Operations Committee, and I have a personal connection that goes back 2 decades with Delegate Kerr, and that's on stage. When I was struggling through the solos as Sheriff Ed.D. in Best Little Whorehouse in Texas at the Weinberg Center, the great house band included Delegate Dr. Ken Kerr. So we have a connection that he remembers me standing backstage with the tech crew. They were holding a plastic bucket because I had to walk out and open the show with a song. And every single performance night, I was incredibly nauseous as I walked out there to do that. So he's never exposed that secret. And so I'm in his debt for never having done that. But Ken, welcome to Chamber Conversation. I'm really looking forward to our time together today.
Thanks, Rick. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. So let's talk about your experience as a state delegate, because it's kind of unlike any other state delegate's first term. Nothing about your term has been normal. And this year, more than any other, is abnormal. How you prepare yourself, how you serve your constituency. So could you talk about what this year has been like for you?
Yeah, well, the first year we had the speaker who was very ill, and then unfortunately died the day before Sine Die. So that was an odd year. And then this year we had the COVID to deal with, and we adjourned 19 days early. And now we're going to have a year coming up where they're going to split us between half of us will be in the House chamber, and the other half of us will be in the low building in that large room that's the Baltimore County and Montgomery County delegation rooms. So we'll be socially distanced there, and all of the committee meetings are going to be done virtually. If someone comes to see us at the low building, we have to meet them at security and escort them to our office and then escort them out of the building again. So a lot of it's going to be perhaps meeting people off-site. So it's going to be difficult and challenging. My first interim last summer was very quiet. This interim, though, I have had to do delegate stuff every day, 7 days a week. You can't let it. The constituents are just in need of so much help on a variety of things. The biggest is the unemployment insurance. Yeah. Some of them have been waiting 5 weeks and they still haven't heard anything on their claim, or they'll receive payments for a few weeks, and then all of a sudden the payments stop and it says their account's suspended. And so we're able to get them some attention. If they contact our office, we can submit their name and request that their account be reviewed. But still, it's taking a long time. And then in the middle of it, they changed the beacon system to a new software. And so a lot of data got lost. So it's just been really difficult for a lot of people. Other things we're helping them with is evictions and motor vehicles. You know, people can't get out to the MVA and they need to get a car registered or on the road. And it's then people with food insecurity and just in need of some cash assistance. We were able to connect them with certain community resources to help them through it. But there's a lot of desperation out there. So it's been very challenging.
I can certainly imagine that. We see it with our small business members, right? Those mom and pops that are struggling to try to keep the doors open. You know, they didn't have a real robust virtual marketplace before this hit. And to make that transition is really tough. And I got to think this is hard for you because I know you and I know how much you feed off personal interaction with your constituents, you know, going to Ruritan clubs and, you know, being around your constituents in a personal interaction. And now you're going to have a session where, you know, that highly valued 3 minutes at the table on the microphone in front of the HGO committee is so important to people who some of these issues aren't just the legislative policy debates that occur in Annapolis. It affects their lives directly, and they want to come communicate with you. It's got to be tough especially for a guy like you that highly values that human interaction, to know you're going to have to legislate without it or in a different way.
It is. So, you know, when people email us or phone the office, a lot of times they think that because it's not a personal interaction, it's discounted somehow. And I want people to know that we do read all the emails that come in. We do read all the letters that they send us. So it's effective to communicate with us virtually. It's not as enjoyable. It's not as meaningful interpersonally. But I want people to know that their voices will be heard this session, and that they can be assured that we will pay attention to phone calls and emails and written correspondence.
Yeah, and so while you're doing that, and I know you do a lot of that, you're also working really hard on some really important legislation that's bubbled up to you through the people that you serve. Issues like family rights and protections. Consumer protections. You've done a lot of work in the craft beverage industry based on our burgeoning craft beverage, you know, brewery, distillery, and winery businesses here in Frederick County. Would you talk a little bit about those legislative issues that you're working so hard on?
Well, I had one bill that got through both chambers and was enacted into law last year, and that was to change the definition of what a family is. For FMLA, for family leave. We had a constituent who cares for an intellectually limited adult man. And he got cancer and needed to be taken to radiation treatments. And one of the married couple who are his guardians was unable to use FMLA to get time off of work to take him. And of course, he doesn't have a license. He's incapable of getting himself to the doctors. And because it was the spouse of the legal guardian, she was not covered by FMLA. And so we got that changed. You know, people just wanted to take responsibility for this man who is incapable of caring for himself. And then were penalized for doing so. So we got that sorted out last year. Another one that got through both chambers, but the clock ran out before it could cross back over into the House, had to do with escheatment. That's when a bank account or financial instrument doesn't have any activity for 3 years. It's considered abandoned property. So I had a constituent who had $100,000 in an account that he's in his early 50s, knew that it was there for his retirement. He didn't need it for another 10 or 15 years. So he just ignored it, knowing it was safe in the bank. Well, he was doing his taxes the next year and said, well, an account's missing. So his $100,000 was considered abandoned. All the banks had to do was attempt to contact you one time by first-class mail. So the bill that we put in said that if the account has over $10,000, then it has to be certified mail return receipt. The Attorney General liked the bill and requested that we lower the amount to $1,000. Got through the House that way. Went over to the Senate. Maryland Banking and Association got involved and asked the Senate to put it back to 10. The Senate put it back to 10. So we were unable to get a conference committee, which I assume would have probably compromised at the $5,000 level. So that one's coming back, and I think that'll have a good chance. Another one that had two really good hearings had to do with a safe school seizure law. You know that children, 25% of the people who get epilepsy are 14 and under, and every year between 25 and 40,000 people experience their first seizure. So the likelihood is that the first seizure could very well happen in school. And if you've ever seen anyone experience a seizure, it's frightening. It's frightening for the person having the seizure, for everyone around. So this act was just saying that there's a 30-minute professional development that the National Epilepsy Society put out that just informs people what to do. So it's less frightening. You know, that the best way to counter fear is with information. So that had a really good hearing in both chambers. Senator Young cross-filed, and but then it got hung up in committee, because even though there was no testimony against it during the bill hearing, there was objections to the bill behind the scenes, and again there was no time to work it out. So we're working out those things before the session starts, so that it should go through this year.
That's great. Well, one thing I'm not sure all our viewers will remember is that the session was truncated by COVID, yes. Right? As the infection rate and hospitalization and ICU utilization rates were skyrocketing, President Ferguson and Speaker Jones made what I think was the right decision to not have you all 188 of you in close proximity, arguing at the top of your lungs and spewing, microorganisms into the air. And so the time that, conferences would have worked and you'd have been able to work behind the scenes to build consensus, that was just taken away from you. So I'm glad you're bringing those ideas back.
Yeah, I tried to help the craft beverage industry with a couple of bills that were unsuccessful. But when you go up against the liquor lobby, it's a difficult thing. But this was a Class L license that they have in Allegheny County now that would have allowed Maryland breweries and wineries and distilleries to carry each other's products. You friends, you want to get together and go sit down at Flying Dog or Idiom and have a beer, and one of your friends doesn't drink beer. This would have allowed them to serve some Hidden Hills wine or perhaps some McClintock distillery drink, as long as it was made in Maryland. The other was a Class MD license that would have allowed a restaurant to get a license, or essentially it would have allowed for a tavern license in Frederick County as well. But you could only serve beer, wine, and spirits that were made in Frederick County. So both of those got a lot of opposition. So I'll keep working on them. And another one had to do with cover crops. That all of the barley that goes into making Maryland beer comes from out of state, except for maybe there's a malting facility in Montgomery County that does a little bit of malting, because there's not really enough two-row barley grown in Maryland to supply the agency. For example, Flying Dog uses 50 tons a week of malted barley. and the amber fields out in New Midway, he's capable of malting 1 ton a week. So his entire year's production would go into Flying Dog for 1. So I was looking for a way to incentivize Maryland farmers to grow more 2-row barley. There's a program called a winter cover crop program, where they will grow a crop to fix the soil, pull out some nitrogen and potassium during the winter, but they can't sell it, and they can't till it under. Because it's all has to do with soil erosion. Right. So my bill said that if you grow 2-row barley, you can participate in the $75 per acre stipend that you get with the cover crop program, but you can also harvest the 2-row barley, thinking we could just let people know that this is a crop that will grow on your farm.
Right.
And so that got an unfavorable from committee. It as well got a lot of opposition. But I was attempting to help 2 of the important businesses in my district, the distilleries, the wineries, the breweries, and the farmers who are getting killed by soybean prices right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had a conversation with Senator Charlie Smelser, who represented Carroll and Frederick County a long time ago, before me, before my time in the General Assembly. And Senator Smelser once told me, and I was often referred to as young man, although I'm 62 years old now. Senator Smelser said something like this: a bad bill can pass in 90 days. A really good bill might take 2 or 3 sessions. So my guts tell me that your work on behalf of our craft beverage industry, one, you're fighting Manus canning and the distribution system, the 3-tiered monstrosity that so tightly controls alcohol production and sale in the state of Maryland. But I will tell you on behalf of our distillers, our vintners, and our brewers, that they deeply appreciate these efforts, because if nothing else gets accomplished, you've elevated an issue to the level that people are talking about it. And often that brings attention to the other issues associated with, the production and sale of alcohol in Frederick County and in Maryland in general. So I applaud you, and you got to keep fighting the fight. I mean, my relative caregiver bill took 2.5 sessions to get through. So that proves Senator Smelser's adage that sometimes really good bills take a little bit longer to get through. So keep fighting. I know because you serve on HGO that you're involved in prescription drug monitoring. Yeah. And that's an issue that you've been passionate about. Would you talk about that for just a couple minutes?
Well, the prescription drug monitoring program had a sunset provision. A lot of times people may not know that in order to get a bill passed that has some opposition, you agree to give it a trial run and then revisit it in a period of years. If the bill's not working, it sunsets. If the bill is working, though, the sunset provision has to be removed. So that was my first bill. Chairman Pendergrass gave me the bill to work. So I learned a lot about prescription drugs in Maryland, especially opiates and opioids and controlled dangerous substances. So the prescription drug monitoring program requires that before a prescription can be written for controlled dangerous substance, it has to go through the CRISP system, where your physician looks to see if you've been prescribed similar controlled dangerous substances, just to make sure that you're not a drug seeker, that you're not doctor shopping. So it's really effective. For the first time since 2012, we saw opiate-related overdose deaths decrease through the prescription drug monitoring program. And there are 250,000 fewer controlled dangerous substance prescriptions written in the state of Maryland, not individual pills, but actual prescriptions, 250,000 of them. So it was an effective bill, and I was glad to be able to work it to get that sunset provision removed. I had another bill last year that didn't get out of judiciary in the House. It got out, again, Senator Young cross-filed it for me. It had to do with a drug not a lot of people know about. It's called Kratom. And it's sold here in Frederick out of gas stations and tobacco shops. And this is an herbal substance, but it hits the same brain receptors as opiates do. That's called a CYP3A4 receptor. And so it can interfere with a lot of drugs that share the pathway. You know, there's a drug called Coumadin that's a blood thinner that's commonly used. And if you're a Kratom user, both of those drugs are competing for that same narrow metabolic pathway. So you can either get too much of the Coumadin and bleed out, or not enough of the Coumadin and throw a clot. So it's not a benign substance, and it does mimic the effects of opiates. In a low dose, it's a stimulant. In a high dose, it's a sedative. And it's completely unregulated. So what Senator Young and my bill was requesting to do is to put an age limit on it, so that you have to be 21 in order to buy it. And ran into a lot of opposition again. So I don't know if this year's the right year to bring it back, because it's going to be a session where we deal with a lot of needs of Maryland businesses and Maryland residents. So maybe this bill will just have to sit out for another year before I try it again.
Well, if you'd like to, after session, I'm happy to talk to you about some education we can do through our channels, social media outreach. Our social media outreach is broad and significant here in the county, and I'd be happy to work with you to maybe do some messaging. I think that's an important part of a good piece of legislation coming out. That's something we could talk about. But in our last couple minutes, I wanted to talk about the concept of leadership in the General Assembly, and how when you've proven yourself and you've established a reputation, both in the floor and in committee, of being a hard worker and, you know, focused on legislative product and the interests of 8+ million Marylanders, in both parties, both in the majority and the minority, the leadership sees that and they reward that. You were designated this year as one of the deputy whips for the majority party. So I want you to talk about that. And then I'd also like you to talk about serving on, you serve on 2 subcommittees that are incredibly important in terms of legislation that comes through your overall committee, but also now you're on a statewide oversight committee for nursing homes and long-term care. So talk about what that means, you know, what it means to be a deputy whip, and your leadership service statewide on an issue that's so important to all of us as we age and our parents age, those of us that still have them. Talk about that for our last couple minutes, please.
Well, it was a surprise and very gratifying to have the speaker appoint me as a member of her staff on the whip group as a deputy whip. Now, what a whip does is essentially finds out where people are on a certain issue. And there are several of us, and we have a list of people typically on our committee where we'll just say, where do you stand on this issue? So we can see, do we have enough votes that this bill is going to pass easily? Do we have to meet with some people, see what their objections are, see if we can work out some type of a compromise in order to get the legislation done? So sometimes it's very routine. We'll get a card in the morning and just say, get it back to me by 2 o'clock. But then sometimes they'll come up to you on the floor and hand you a whip card and say, I need this back in 5 minutes. So you have to go all over the chamber and find your whip list and see where they stand on an issue. So it can be exciting, but it's important work. The other thing I was appointed to was the Oversight Committee for Quality Care in Nursing Homes and Long-Term Care, Assisted Living Facilities. And that was a bill that was created in 2017, I think, that established this committee. It has 2 senators, 2 delegates, and then representatives from the industry, patient groups, resident groups, and labor groups. So it's a big stew of people that's trying to come together and establish a vision and a way forward for how we can improve the quality of care in these long-term care facilities. So we have been hammering out this document all summer. And for the last month, we've been meeting once a week. And we have a draft of this bill that we are by law required to deliver to the governor by December 1st. That just says, here's what we need to address right now. And a lot of it has to do with training and retention and hiring of qualified people who are dedicated to this important work. Another is how do we secure sufficient quantities of personal protective equipment? And then, what do we do about, a lot of people who are in these facilities are on Medicaid. And so how do we keep this industry viable and healthy by adjusting the Medicaid reimbursements? So a lot goes into it, a lot that, before you get on a committee like this, you have no understanding of the complexity of the issue. But like so many of the things in the legislature, they're complex issues. And anybody that thinks there are simple answers doesn't understand the problem.
Right. Well, listen, this has been great. And I want to thank you. Every session that you've been serving, I've been able to come down once or a couple times. And every time I've done that, you've taken time, even in the hallway, running between committee and the floor, to spend a few minutes to hear what the issues are with the business community in Frederick County. And on their behalf, I deeply appreciate that you're always open and willing to chat with me about what is motivating their interests at a particular moment in time. So thanks for that. Look forward to that. Maybe not this session. We won't be able to get together much because of the session, but immediately after, I'd like you to consider doing this again so we can kind of update everybody on what has happened. Our thoughts are with you as you gear up for this important time and the work you're going to do from January, hopefully all the way through to early April. So keep up the great work. Thanks for your representation of the interests of the business community in Frederick County. I look forward to talking to you again.
Anytime, Rick. Good to see you.
Thanks, Ken.